Let your eyes rest. Let your breathing slow. Wherever you are, your bed, your couch, a quiet train ride home, let this moment unfold gently. You're about to walk down a hallway that history never finished building, one lined not with statues, but shadows, not with legends, but silences. We celebrate names like Newton, Curie, Da Vinci, brilliant minds who shifted the world. But for every recognized genius, there are dozens more whose work flickered brightly, then vanished. Some were silenced, others simply disappeared. Their discoveries lost. Their thoughts scattered like ashes in the margins of forgotten manuscripts. And yet, something about them remains subtle fingerprints on our world, invisible to most, but still pulsing beneath the surface. Tonight, as the world sleeps, we will meet 10 of them. 10 minds that touched the edge of brilliance and fell off the map. They won't be loud. They won't demand attention. But if you listen closely, you might hear them whisper across the centuries. And so we begin with a man who tried to build a machine that could hear time whisper back. Picture a narrow attic in 18th century Sweden in the small frost-kissed town of Solna. Outside, the snow falls in silence. But inside, in this dim, dust-heavy room, the air is thick with ticking. Gears, cogs, pendulums, springs. And sitting in the center of it all is a man with hollow cheeks and ink-stained hands. His name was Jonas Lidstrom, and he didn't just build clocks. He tried to understand time itself. By trade, Jonas was a horologist, a master of mechanical timekeeping. But his obsession with time ran deeper than hours and minutes. To him, time wasn't a line. It was a spiral, a lattice, a thing with moods. He believed clocks didn't just measure time, they affected it. That by designing a certain kind of clock, you could listen to the fractures in reality, hear the moments that never should have happened, or the ones that were supposed to, but didn't. He worked mostly alone, drawing strange devices in his journals. Clocks that ran backwards for a few seconds at the stroke of midnight, others that counted imaginary minutes between seconds. One winter he designed a strange contraption made of bronze rings, each spinning in opposite directions, powered by magnetism and thermal shifts. He called it the reversal engine. He claimed it could detect pre-time anomalies, events that tried to exist before they were supposed to. A moment that somehow appeared in the timeline, then erased itself. The townspeople whispered. Some believed he was a genius. Others said he had gone mad, staring too long at second hands. They noticed odd occurrences when he tested the machine. Candles would flicker, even with no wind. Clocks throughout Solna would fall out of sync. People claimed they saw glimpses of themselves from behind, even when no mirrors were around. One woman, a baker's wife, swore she remembered a conversation with her husband that, according to him, never happened. Jonas took all this as proof. He began locking himself in his attic for days at a time, scribbling in notebooks, muttering phrases like chronal displacement and event feedback. He wrote that time was a creature, not a dimension, something that learned, that responded, and if provoked, corrected. One day, Jonas vanished. The attic was locked from the inside. No sign of struggle. All of his clocks were still ticking, but not one showed the same time. The reversal engine? Gone. His journals? Scattered, pages torn, symbols half burned. On his desk sat one final note, a single phrase written in shaky ink. Time saw me. He was never found. The local magistrates called it a disappearance. Others whispered about time loops or self-erasure. Some believed Jonas stepped outside of time entirely and was simply no longer accessible to us. Years passed. His name faded. His inventions were sold, melted down, forgotten. But then strange things began happening again. In distant cities, Florence, Kyoto, Prague, clockmakers would report visions, strange dreams, designs that came to them in sleep. Blueprints for machines they swore they had never studied, but somehow remembered. Machines eerily similar to Jonas's reversal engine, as if time itself was trying to reassemble what it had once destroyed. Take a moment with that thought. What if time isn't just a backdrop for events, but an active force with its own preferences and secrets? And what if Jonas wasn't trying to control it, but escape it? What happens to a man who tries to listen to time too closely? Perhaps he becomes something else. Or maybe he's still ticking away just somewhere we can't follow. Now breathe. Gently. Let that thought settle like dust over quiet gears. The next name doesn't come from Europe, but from the desert winds of 13th century Persia, where logic and poetry often shared the same breath. She lived near the crumbling city of Nishapur, surrounded by sand, stars, and centuries of forgotten thought. Her name was never carved in marble or copied in gold-leafed texts, only scrawled in the margins of an astronomy book, in the careful hand of a man named Hazen al-Jafari. A single line, the girl who proved the limits of numbers could fold. Her name was Layla Mavash, daughter of a glassmaker, student of geometry, secret philosopher. She was 16 when she began writing strange theorems in the back of broken books. Theories that played with the infinite, not just as an abstract, but as a shape, a structure, a foldable concept. According to legend, she proposed that infinity was not a single direction, but a landscape, one with valleys and cliffs, places you could fall into and never climb out of. She wrote equations that didn't resolve, they echoed. Patterns that spiraled back into themselves, like numbers dreaming. Her writings described something she called mirror primes, numbers that only made sense when viewed backward through another number's perspective. She believed that in every numerical system there existed a blind spot, a place where logic bent and curled like heat on the horizon. Some said she was trying to break math open like an egg. Then came the manuscript. The folding manuscript, as it would later be called, was never meant to be found. A single copy, bound in camel hide, buried beneath the floor of a collapsed observatory. Inside were pages of nonsensical symbols, some resembling Arabic numerals, others like stars connected by invisible threads. The equations had no answers, only paths. When rediscovered centuries later, no one could agree if it was mathematics or poetry, or both. Layla disappeared one summer. just as the Mongols advanced. Some say she fled east. Others claim she burned her work and walked into the desert. A few believe she folded herself out of this world, like the numbers she once drew. But fragments of her thought linger. In certain Persian tiles, those whose patterns never quite repeat. In quantum models where numbers behave like waves. In forgotten corners of code where recursion breeds recursion and never stops. Perhaps the most dangerous thing Layla ever suggested was this, that numbers, like people, don't always want to stay in line. Now close your eyes, if you haven't already. Let that idea settle behind your ribs. What if reality runs not on logic, but on a version of it we haven't yet recognized? If so, maybe she did solve infinity, just not in a way we were ready to see. The third is even harder to trace. His name was barely real to begin with. He signed his letters as Isaac the Builder, though no one knows if his real name was Isaac. He claimed to be from an island called Hesperin, which appears on no reliable map. He corresponded briefly with urban planners in 19th century France and architects in early Argentina, each time with slightly different handwriting, and each time offering blueprints for impossible cities. One design showed a metropolis where every building changed height based on the collective emotions of its residents. Another depicted a city shaped like a spiral galaxy, where streets curved according to star charts. He proposed a sewer system that could filter not just waste, but grief. A courthouse with acoustics that adjusted depending on the honesty of the speaker. He was never met in person. Letters arrived with no return address. The paper was always thick, unusually warm to the touch. Some recipients claimed they smelled seawater when they opened the envelopes. His final plan was for a city with no straight lines, a place where every surface gently curved, mimicking the inside of a living cell. The design was rejected as madness. Within months, his letters stopped. Some believe he was a pseudonym used by a secret society of architects. Others think he never existed at all, but scattered in the margins of old journals and forgotten blueprints. You can still find references as per Builder's theory, one notes. The Hesperin curve, another says. Sometimes cities echo people who never existed. Or maybe they did, just not entirely in this world. Take another breath. Let it all drift, the ticking machines, the folding numbers, the city that feels like a heartbeat. These minds may be gone, their traces faint, but in the silence between ideas, in the shadow of reason, they still whisper. And soon we'll listen again. The wind changes now, no longer the dry hush of Persian deserts or the ticking echoes of lost machines. Now we turn our ear to the wet, gray quiet of an unnamed island off the coast of Norway, a place where fog creeps like thought itself, slow and patient, curling around the edges of stone homes and memory. The locals say the island doesn't appear on most maps. They call it Lillehaven, Little Haven, though no ships dock there anymore. It was here, in the early 20th century, that a girl named Sophie Nystrom began drawing pictures of stars that didn't exist. Not in our sky, not in any telescope. They came to her in dreams, star systems with strange geometries, constellations shaped like spirals collapsing into themselves. As a child, she scrawled them on napkins, in the margins of books, on the walls of her bedroom. Her mother, a lighthouse keeper, said Sophie never cried as a baby, only hummed, tunes that no one could quite place, but that seemed to make the tide shift ever so slightly when she sang. By age 12, Sophie was solving astronomical equations that confused her teachers. By 16, she had written a manuscript titled The Geometry of Unobservable Heavens. No publisher would touch it. Too strange, too theoretical. She proposed that the universe had blind spots, areas not hidden by distance or darkness, but by cognition, places our minds were biologically incapable of perceiving, like trying to smell a color. She suggested that these regions contained their own laws of physics, and that certain humans, especially children, could briefly tune into them before their brains calcified into consensus. Her ideas bordered on metaphysics, but were rooted in numbers. Her manuscript included equations that folded in on themselves, geometries with more than 3 spatial dimensions. She described a kind of cosmic tinnitus, a background hum in the universe that only a few could hear. And worse, that this hum had rhythm, pattern, intention. She tried building devices to measure it. One resembled a telescope made of mirrors and piano wire. Another looked like a wind chime designed by an alien physicist. When activated, these devices did not produce data. They evoked feelings, dread, euphoria, nostalgia for places no one had visited. Several who interacted with her inventions reported vivid dreams of spiral staircases suspended in blackness, of whispers echoing backward, of cities made of ash. Eventually, her work drew attention. Scientists came, dismissed her, laughed, sometimes kindly, sometimes not. But one day she vanished. Her mother said Sophie walked into the sea, simply stepped off the edge of the shore and kept going, her humming growing quieter until it dissolved into the waves. They searched for days. Nothing. Years later, an astronomer in Chile picked up a faint signal, a pattern of pulses in a frequency band thought to be silent. It resembled music, only partially detectable, but those who heard it said it reminded them of humming, of tide shift, of something half remembered, something almost home. And so we ask, what if the universe has edges we were never meant to touch? What if Sophie found them and walked through? Let that idea ripple. A child who drew unseen constellations, a melody only water could hold, a blind spot in the sky where something else might be watching back. Breathe. The next mind came not from solitude, but from the chaos of revolution. 19th century Russia. A young man named Pavel Mirov, born in the crumbling outskirts of St. Petersburg. His mother was a mathematician, his father a revolutionary. Pavel was both and neither. He didn't seek political power or pure abstraction. He sought patterns in behavior, not of individuals, but of nations, of revolutions, of collapse. Pavel believed history could be modeled like weather. not predicted perfectly, but forecast in probability zones. He created something called the event spiral, a mathematical model that suggested all major historical shifts follow repeating rhythms like musical phrases. Revolutions, empires, renaissances, all triggered by a complex feedback loop of inequality, innovation, and emotional saturation. He plotted these cycles across centuries, layering data from Mesopotamia to modern Europe. He claimed that once the spiral was fully understood, one could not just anticipate the next revolution, but modulate it, prevent it, or accelerate it, depending on one's goals. Naturally, this terrified people. He was branded a heretic by scholars and a threat by politicians. His papers were seized. He was arrested, released, arrested again. Each time he returned quieter, more withdrawn, but always writing. His final work was titled Resonant Structures in Human Uprising. It was never published. The manuscript was lost during a raid. Only fragments survive, equations written in the margins of letters scratched into the underside of a library desk. Some say he vanished in the Siberian wastes. Others believe he escaped and founded a secret school dedicated to studying behavioral geometry. A few claim his spiral model still exists, encoded within obscure Russian operas or the architecture of Moscow's oldest metro stations. A model of revolution, hidden in song and stone. Breathe again. We chase ghosts, we always have. But perhaps they aren't ghosts, only minds that stepped a bit too far beyond what the world could carry. Sophie, Pavel, they didn't vanish because they were wrong. They vanished because they were too early. And we, drifting in the hush between sleep and waking, get to hear them now. Sleep is near. The world is quieter now. You're deeper into the dark, your breath slower, the weight of the day fading. You've followed whispers and echoes, walked the ghost trails of minds nearly erased. But there's still more, one last descent into the forgotten. A final thread to trace through the labyrinth of time and thought. It begins with a code. Not digital, not mathematical, but musical. Her name was Celine Kwan. Late 20th century, Hong Kong. A composer, but not of symphonies. Her music lived in frequencies the ear couldn't hear, inaudible arrangements layered into static, into the hum of old televisions, the silence between radio stations. She called it resonant entropy. It was a new kind of music, one meant not to be heard but felt, detected not by the ears but by the nervous system, a signal designed to bypass consciousness. Celine believed music had once been used not to entertain, but to align minds, that ancient chants, drumming rituals, and harmonic prayers were early forms of neurological calibration, crude but effective tools to sync thought, emotion, even memory. Her theory went further, that there existed a universal harmonic, a kind of cosmic tuning note that, if rediscovered, could allow collective awareness to stabilize, to share thought, emotion, sensation. She encoded her compositions with mathematical sequences, fractal echoes, and quantum noise. When played through analog systems, strange things happened. Listeners reported vivid, unplaceable memories, hallucinations of cities they'd never visited, dreams in languages they didn't speak. One man said he remembered being born, not as himself, but as someone else, centuries ago. Celine never performed live. She left cassette tapes in abandoned buildings, mailed them without return addresses to physicists, philosophers, and strangers. Each tape was different, each embedded with slight variations in pulse and pitch, designed to match the recipient's presumed cognitive patterns. How she knew those patterns no one could explain. Then she disappeared. A university lab studying her work burned down. Surveillance tapes showed nothing. Her studio was found intact, her journals soaked in salt water despite no sign of flooding. The only remaining trace was a recording uploaded anonymously to an obscure data archive. It was labeled simply, Entropy Sonata, Final Cut. Play it, and you hear only static. But beneath the noise, some claim they can still feel her there, whispering a song not meant to be heard, only remembered. Take a breath. The idea lingers. That sound, the most ephemeral of all art forms, could be used not to entertain, but to awaken. What would it mean if every noise around you held meaning? If every silence was not absence, but a message? And now, finally, the last name. And it isn't a person at all. It's a collective. A group known only in fragments, referenced in marginalia, private letters, dismissed footnotes in psychological texts. They called themselves the Orphean Boundary. No records exist of their formation, only that sometime in the early 1900s, a handful of scientists, mystics, and ex-military linguists came together with one purpose, to map the human mind from the outside. They believed that consciousness, like a landscape, had borders, not metaphors, but measurable limits, places where identity, memory, and language broke down. They claimed these thresholds could be reached through isolation, specific breathing rhythms, sound patterns, and exposure to unfamiliar symbolic systems, abstract alphabets, impossible shapes, cognitive illusions. Participants would enter these experiments for days. Some returned with journals written in unknown scripts. Others couldn't remember their names, but described entire cities of thought, places they swore they had lived for years. One man painted a door endlessly, said he found it in a hallway of his mind, and that it whispered his name in reverse. Eventually they were silenced, some members institutionalized. A few vanished. Their final report, minus 347 pages, was supposedly destroyed, but a single excerpt survived, found hidden in a hollowed-out psychology textbook. We approached the Orphean Boundary, and on the other side we did not find madness. We found something watching back. What was it? The unconscious? God? A reflection of collective human fear? Or just the echo of too much thinking? You don't need the answer, just the question. Let it float unclaimed. Now rest. Jonas, Layla, Isaac, Sophie, Pavel, Celine. The Orphean Boundary. They weren't meant to be famous. They weren't carved into the timeline, but their thoughts leaked through, like dreams you forget but still feel. And tonight you heard them again. Good night.